phone calls and even offline communications. But I think there were moments when bilateral dealings with the North intensified, where there may have been a little bit of unease in Seoul that they weren't getting the whole picture up to the minute as key issues were being worked. So I think there's always room for strengthening consultations, especially as we move into Phase 3, which is where much more weighty decisions are going to be needed on the denuclearization process itself, on how to handle the uranium enrichment issue and proliferation, where probably measures going beyond the current verification protocol may be needed as we get into the dismantlement phase. So I think that South Koreans have been, I think, careful in public to project a unified approach, and I think there is general satisfaction with the trend in the talks. But as we get into the difficult third phase, even more intense consultations will be needed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Richard, as promised, you get the.
Thank you for that nice talk about Korea. I don't know if you remember, but I was in Korea last year and visited you at the embassy with a bunch of Korean Americans visiting Korea at the time. My question is really about economics. The third point that you mentioned is that you wanted to upgrade the economic alliance between Korea and the United States. And you mentioned the importance of FTA, and you also stated that concessions on the auto might be a small price to pay to get the FTA approved. So my question is really, what kind of concessions are we thinking about? That's one. Second is that if Lee Myung-bak administration is willing to make these concessions, what kind of preparations would they have to do with the Korean public to avoid another candle vigil by the mass public? And then finally, what is your perspective on how this global financial crisis and how that's, how Korea will weather this crisis based on your experience in Korea?
Well, I think it would be a little risky for me to get too far along in specifying what might form the elements of a package of additional measures on automobiles. There's a few things in the FTA itself that may need to be updated because they were the treatment of environmental standards, the agreement by Korea to allow the California standard to be applicable for a certain period of time. That because of the delays in ratification, we may want to look at something in that area for a longer period of time and maybe broaden the scope so that it's less onerous for U.S. manufacturers to produce models for the Korean market. Because it's not, while it's a small market, it's not realistic for them to produce specially tailored models for that market. I think there may be other things that can offer a truly level playing field for U.S. car exporters, and then of course they're going to have to compete. One can't. I'm not a believer in managed trade, in which there'd be some quota on U.S. sales in Korea before the benefits of the FTA would kick in for the Korean side. How will Korea get through the financial crisis? Well, I can't predict for Korea much better than I can for the United States. They've certainly been affected quite dramatically in terms of the decline in the stock market and the exchange rate of the Korean won. But I think that the U.S. have shown a certain degree of confidence in Korea's ability to manage the situation with the currency swap arrangement announced by the Treasury at the end of October, which we're glad to see, at least for a time, stemmed the downward spiral in the sense of panic that was beginning to break out in Korea. But I think Korea's fundamentals still are pretty strong in terms of hard currency reserves, and so the Korean banking system, I think, they have less difficulties getting back in shape than the U.S. financial system. So I remain cautiously optimistic that despite everybody's dependence on how well the U.S. pulls out of the crisis, I think the Koreans are doing the right things in very unpredictable times.
Okay, Eric, microphone's on the way to you.
All right. Eric McClay, the Institute for Foreign Policy Analysis. I'm also a retired Navy officer. When I speak outside of Washington, always one of the first questions says something like, thank you for your service. And I find myself thinking, well, it was kind of its own reward. It was a wonderful career. But I must say that yours makes me think exactly that. So now I find myself saying to you, thank you for your service and really meaning it.
Thanks a lot.
But my question is about Korean attitudes, South Korean attitudes, toward the use of U.S. forces. You mentioned the global aspect having been discussed at Camp David. But I guess I'm asking you now, maybe something I asked you when you were here before, the flexible response and so forth. Maybe you can speak to it from a little different perspective now. What will we encounter if we do have to intervene in a Taiwan crisis and we find ourselves in a bind and we really want to use the forces there and so forth? Would you offer a few thoughts on that, please?
Well, that's a dangerous terrain for me to get into a speculative mode on.
I was hoping less dangerous now, but...
Yeah, well, some people say we papered over this issue, but I think we did reach an understanding back in early 2006 when we came up with this artful diplomatic formula in which, I can't remember the words exactly, the Koreans respected the U.S. requirement to use some of its forces based in Korea in potential future contingencies, but we respected the Korean position that it should not be drawn into any conflict against the will of the Korean people.
Yes.
And so I think that we in a worst case scenario, we would have to respect that understanding and try to find other ways to source any military operation without using forces based in Korea. But if we really had no alternative, we would have to have a very intense process of consultation and listen to what our allies, the Koreans, have to say. And if they really can't accept whatever assurances or compensating measures we offer them, we would have to respect our allies' wishes. I think that we cannot take these kinds of commitments lightly. I think in those circumstances, certainly the current Korean government might be more willing to find a way forward to work through these issues. But let's just hope that contingency never arises, by working together with the Koreans and with the Japanese to continue to encourage the more constructive trend in Chinese policy in Northeast Asia, so that these kinds of things don't happen.
Ken?
Ken Yates, Jefferson Waterman. Mr. Investor, I'm an old dog from USIA, and we had a pretty good operation. I watched with dismay as it was dismantled in 1997. Piece by piece it dropped off, and I watched with further dismay when the demonstrations and the candlelight parades and the beat problems swirled around the whole problem. Now that you're back after the 3 years, what would you see as the way forward that the new administration here, we've got only now less than 4 years before transfer of OPCON comes up, and that's another public diplomacy problem. Where can we go from here? How can we get Humpty Dumpty back together again?
Well, first I think don't overreact to the images of the candlelight vigils or the protests back in 2002 over the tragic accident with the schoolgirls, because I think that the overall image of the United States and the overall popular support for the alliance is actually quite high. And as I was saying in my remarks, it kind of endured through the worst days of the beef crisis, which, despite the pain that we felt, was largely directed against President Lee and his government was far less of an anti-American activity than it may have